everybody. Welcome back to Shit Creek Survivors, where we openly share stories of individuals getting stuck up shit creek without a paddle, the good, the bad, the ugly, the funny, but more importantly, we share how those individuals got out of those situations and got their lives moving in the right direction again. That way we can all learn from their experience. Shit Creek Survivors is about sharing stories, finding support, and realizing that even when things feel like a total mess, there is a way forward. In this episode, we have the pleasure of meeting Patrick, who is a United States Army chaplain. He'll be explaining the functions of a military chaplain and how he helps his troops overseas and in country. So here we go. We're here again with my buddy Dennis. Dennis, how are we doing today?
That's me. How you doing?
I am doing well. I'm very excited for our guest today and we are having Patrick on. Patrick, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you
Glad to
so
have you.
much. Yeah, glad to have you. A little background. I got to meet Patrick when I first got down to Atlanta. I had just started working at a golf course because my wife, when I asked her, what am I supposed to do now? She said, go get a job at a golf course. It's giving you some peace. Let's continue with that. And when I met the pro there, Tim, not only did he click with me because his brother was a former police officer or maybe even a current police officer in the St. Louis area,
Oh, well.
but yeah, in St. Charles, I forget. It was really funny, but I actually got to ask him a little bit more about himself, and he shared with me Patrick's name and how Patrick was what is it, his pastor at the time? Yeah, pastor at the time, and how they had a men's group, and how he'd like me to come out and share my story with the men's group, which I got to go do. It was one of the first times I talked to any group down here in Atlanta, and it was so hospitable, so welcoming. I was able to share my story. I felt empowered afterwards. It was so cool. It was obviously a great group of people. Recently I found out that after that, and it's been quite a while since we talked, years. I would say, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, somewhere in there.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, but during that time, you actually separated from the position that you were in and
hmm
you transitioned into being a military army chaplain, which is amazing. I want to know all about it, but really quickly, could you first kind of just introduce yourself to ourselves and the audience and let us know kind of where you're coming from, a little background and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll get into the juicy stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me. And it was a good connection for us to make. Tim's an amazing guy. So it doesn't surprise me at all that when he met you, he thought we ought to talk. That's the kind of person he is. So yeah, a little bit about me. I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. And actually, when I was still in high school, felt like I wanted to go to seminary. And I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to look like. And so didn't really know where God was calling me to, but just knew that God was calling me to something. So went to college, and from the safety and comfort of my fraternity house, I was watching some of my good friends parachute into Kuwait. And so I thought, well, maybe that's where God's calling me to go. So
Okay.
So I went to seminary. I actually got a commission with the Navy to serve in their chaplain candidacy program. And had things gone according to my plan, you'd actually be sitting down with the retired chief of chaplains from the Navy right now. But because I figured I was, way too cool to ever serve in a church. But the military requires 2 years of congregational ministry before you can go on active duty full time. So after seminary, I moved to Chicago, planning on being there for 2 years and then on an aircraft carrier somewhere. But during those 2 years, discovered two things. Number one, that I'm really not too cool to do anything. And number two, that I really enjoyed congregational ministry. And so I was probably rather short-sighted, but instead of investigating like transitioning branches or going into the reserves or anything like that, I just resigned my commission. I figured that God was kind of closing a chapter and writing a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Stayed in Chicago for 13 years, working at a couple churches there. And then in 2008, moved down to Georgia with my family to serve as a pastor here. And so, yeah, I served at that church for 15 years. My wife, Katie, and I, we've been married for 27 years. We raised our kids in that church. But then, yeah, it is, kind of getting ahead of myself. But as far as things go, we were actually vacationing in San Diego in 2018. my wife and I are runners. And so Katie and I would get up and run every morning. And one morning when we were running, we turned a corner and came face to face with the building that I lived in when I was stationed there in 1994. So came back to the hotel, told our kids, oh my gosh, we saw the building Dad lived in when he was stationed here, and they were teenagers, so they were amazingly underwhelmed by that information. But one of them asked me, he said, do you ever regret resigning? And I said, yeah, pretty much every day. And that sparked a conversation with my wife. She really, she kind of lit the match, man. She took me aside and was really kind of irritated with me. She said, we've been married 20 years and not once have you said you regret resigning. And we don't live with regret. So if this is something that you want to pursue, if it's something you still want to chase, go for it, man. We know you're too old, 48 at the time. The cutoff is 42. But yeah, she encouraged me. And so I started down that road. Took a while, given my age and lots of hoops to jump through. But yeah, in 2020, then August, got commissioned into the Georgia National Guard as a chaplain. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, just from that story, isn't God amazing?
Oh, yeah.
The way things are, it just falls into place, and the weird, you know what I mean? You think you didn't get something, but you're actually being prepared for it, and like all kinds of stuff. That's such a
and
cool
having a
story.
great support system behind you to be able to push you, like your wife did. Like you never said anything about regrets for 20 years. No, we're not going to do that. You're going to pursue this. That's an awesome support system, and everybody needs to be that lucky.
Absolutely. She is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Sounds like it. So you're about to take that leap and all that kind of stuff. Well, first off, you're about to make that leap. And what is like, when did you finally get the okay, meaning like the final piece of paperwork fell into place? How did that feel?
Yeah, man. So it was crazy because first of all, I had to get an age waiver, which I expected.
Mm-hmm.
So,
prior service probably helped that.
It helped a little bit, but here's the other thing. Then I needed to get a medical waiver because I needed a medical waiver anyway to get into the Navy when I was 23 because I was in a motorcycle accident as a teenager. I had to have surgery, so that checked some box. So I expected that one as well. And that was just go get some x-rays, get an ultrasound, and then let somebody review them. But none of these things are a day-to-day turnaround, right? You got to wait until the next time the board meets. And so any time that I had a hiccup, it was like another 2 months. And so so I had the age waiver, then I had the medical waiver. Then they came back to me and initially they said I needed an academic waiver because my college grades were terrible, which they were.
Mine too.
But my seminary grades were really good. And so but it just took a little convincing, like, hey, this is the qualifying degree and these grades are really good. So I don't know that I ought to spin my wheels for, 25-year-old college grades. And so that just kind of pushed things out a little bit, but they came around on that. And then, and then, so everything just kind of got pushed out a couple months at a time. And then in stereotypical military fashion, I got a call on a Thursday afternoon that said, hey, the board approved your packet. We're commissioning you Monday morning. It's like, all right.
Hurry up and wait. Here it comes.
Yeah. But yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I was thrilled. And
how long did that process take? How long are we talking about?
Yeah, total? That was 16 months.
Okay. Yeah.
From start to finish, but some of it was initially there are 2 tracks to become a chaplain. You have to be endorsed by some sort of denominational body. And that's the military's way of protecting themselves from someone just going online, paying $5 to get ordained, saying they're a chaplain, and then coming in and just being a disaster, being a real liability, especially in any type of deployed situations.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that track, and then there's obviously the military track. And so initially I approached my endorser and he was going to, I'm ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA. And so there's an organization called Presbyterian Federal Chaplains. They they are the endorsing agent for military, VA, and federal prisons. So I went to my endorser. He was going to a recruiting conference, and initially only the Air Force was interested in talking to me. And so I was working with an Air Force recruiter, and then it's all supply and demand, right? So they filled their recruiting quota, so they weren't granting age waivers anymore. So that was just, that door was closed. And at that point, then I started looking at the National Guard. I like the role, not only of the military service, but the things that they do with disaster relief. Yeah. And no disrespect to the Navy, but the Navy's pretty much at sea. And so their reserve component, especially for chaplains, is really small. Yeah. And so shifted over to the National Guard. But yeah, from the time I talked to the Air Force until the time I got commissioned by the Guard, it was probably about 16 months.
Well, we had to keep on it. You had to adjust that course, but you kept going.
Well, and again, I'll just give another shout out to that support system, because at one point, maybe it was the college grades or something else, but my wife and I were walking the dog, and I was like, that's it. Like I'm tapping out. It's ridiculous, so frustrated. And again, she's amazing. And she said, you could do that, and I'm not going to tell you not to. She goes, but you got to wonder, if you do that, are you going to be 70 and wonder
wait a little bit longer?
And it was great the way she put it to me. She said, so far they've said no with a comma.
Yeah.
And until you say no with a period, you might just want to consider sticking in there. Yeah.
That's so amazing to have someone like that in your corner.
Yes.
That is a tool for the toolbox right there, everybody listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Say no with a comma.
Yep.
Wait till they say no with a period.
Absolutely.
I love it. Great advice.
Yeah.
Great advice.
Really good advice. Really good advice. And for those of us who don't really know, what is the role of a reserve chaplain? Like, what is it that you provide?
Yeah. So you hit one of the key topics with that word. So there are really two key words for us. It's perform and provide. And so I am a Protestant chaplain, so I perform religious services for Protestants in my unit. And the other key word is provide. And, I would sort of say provide/protect. I mean, I provide the opportunity for soldiers of other religious traditions to be able to worship in the way in which they need.
Very cool. All right. So you kind of create space for them and make sure that okay.
Exactly. So, just like, let's say I have a Jewish soldier. So just working with command to maybe make sure that Jewish soldier isn't working on Yom Kippur.
Right.
Just adjusting schedule. I don't lead worship for him. I don't provide any prayers. I may have some physical resources, prayer books or whatnot. But my main role for people of other religions is to provide them the opportunity to worship in the way that they need.
Very cool.
We also I had a good chaplain when we were in Iraq. We had a really good storefront set up. It was all free, but like this little, toiletries, little books, some religious, some not religious. It's kind of like a happy place to go find some more toothpaste or toothbrushes if yours was getting low, things like that. And it was probably a good way for them to get people in there and get some exposure to even kind of address any kind of spiritual needs. Now, I grew up kind of religious, but at the same time, while I was in Iraq, I feel like I kind of pushed it away. And I think that was kind of like my own self-preservation way of how I did it. I don't necessarily agree that that's the best way to do it, but that's how I did it. And I'm sure a lot of people are like that too. So having something where you can still get them inside and see them and talk to them a little bit is probably still a good tool for you guys as well.
Yeah, we did that when I was deployed. I had my own chapel. I mean, a permanent chapel setup. My mission was very public. And so, nothing I'm going to say here is going to violate anything. It's just, we are part of the Multinational Force and Observers. And so it's a mission that's been going on in Sinai for over 40 years. And our mission was observe, verify, and report. And so we were just watching Egypt and Israel to make sure that they were adhering to treaties they signed back in the 70s as part of the Camp David Accords.
Nice.
And so to your point, Dennis, since it is so established, I mean, there is a physical building that is the chapel and chapel offices. And so we did just that. We wrote to a bunch of these charity organizations that support deployed soldiers. We would get care packages, and then instead of distributing them to each soldier individually, where they then eat the beef jerky and throw everything else in the garbage, we would collect them all, open them, and then just stock the shelves. We called it the free exchange.
Yeah.
And that was part of the chapel that was open 24 hours. So if people were working night shift but had a break and wanted to get something to eat, of course the dining hall's closed, but they could come in there, get some snacks, that kind of thing. So
that's a really good idea. So when you first got into it, I'm assuming you were stateside, right? Before you were deployed, you were stateside when you initially took on the role?
Right. Yeah. So I served with the field artillery unit for a couple of years. And that was sort of the standard M-Day National Guard stuff, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks of summer. And then at the beginning of, or near the end of 2022, the state chaplain called me, and I was transferring over to an infantry unit specifically for the deployment. Yeah. So I trained up with them through all of 23, and then did the more intentional train up at the beginning of 24. Left, did a month of pre-mob, month of post-mob, and then was deployed for about 10 months overseas, and then got home at the end of January.
Gotcha. So let's talk about individuals who would come to you. What would an individual come to you about before notice of a deployment? Would they come and talk to you about kind of issues they're having at home, or would they talk about kind of like struggles? Or may I ask, is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is employment.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are unemployed or underemployed.
Got it.
And I can only speak to the Georgia Guard. I don't know what it's like in other states, but I mean, we're drawn from all over the state, but in particular then from some rural areas, where the job market is actually more competitive because there are fewer jobs. So a lot of it was working with, what you might call, just very earthly needs, very practical needs, and trying to help them get assistance. So
like employment, food, shelter, kind of like necessities just to kind of make it work.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that's amazing that they have that. Then they come to you about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did things change when you got notice of the deployment? Did people start coming to you with different things? I would imagine they would, but I've never been there. Maybe preparation for leaving, or how that would work.
Yeah, so there is increased anxiety leading up to the deployment, and it kind of comes from both sides. Because we had some very experienced officers and NCOs who had deployed a number of different times before, and again, our mission was a peacekeeping mission. So for any infantry guys that were looking to have a real exciting time and kicking doors and hunt down bad people, that wasn't happening. We were sitting in the talk and looking at cameras. And so
sounds like MP work.
But for some, I would say, look, you know what? Maybe this deployment's for your wife. You've deployed 3 times before, where your wife had to, lay awake at night wondering if they were ever going to talk to you again. And so, you're going to be bored, but maybe your boredom is a comfort to your family at home. So, so let's just try to shift our perspective a little bit and see it from a different angle. And then for some younger soldiers who had never deployed before, a couple who had, never been on a plane before, much less a plane going to, what has since October of 23 been, in close proximity to a pretty violent area in the world. So, anxiety ramps up. I think for a lot of people, myself included, my wife and I kind of got to the point where, like, all right, we just need to go because we're tired of talking about going. So we've known about this for a while. It's been a topic of conversation, and we know it's coming. And so let's just get a move on. Let's get on the bus. Let's get on the plane. Let's get after it, because this talking about it is, like it. I know, like when I do weddings for people, and I'm standing with the groom and the groomsmen before, as the wedding starts, like you start to hear the music, and the groomsmen are all trying to make conversation, and it's all just these dumbass comments,
Yeah.
because there's
Boys will be
really,
boys.
yeah, there's really nothing else to talk about. Like, the music is playing, we all know what we're here to do. There's nothing else to talk about. Let's just get out there and get this guy married. Like, I call it elevator talk. Like, you're just trying to make conversation while that elevator's going up the building. And it got to the point for families like that as well. Like, we're trying to talk about all these other things, but we don't care about the Oscars. We don't care about the Super Bowl. We care about the fact you're leaving in 2 weeks, so
Yeah.
let's just get going. And I feel like once we actually got there and got in country, like the anxiety level actually kind of came down, because people are like, all right, we're here. This is what we've been training to do. Now we can go do it. Yeah.
Plus, you start getting an actual like perception of the reality, where before you get there, the sky's the limits on all the things you're worried about, your what if and everything to death. And then you get there and you're like, okay, this ain't so bad.
Right.
I can deal with this.
Exactly.
Or I got room to move and grow and get more comfortable.
Yeah.
Set up a routine.
And then, so the next one would be when you're in country. What are people coming to you with now? Did that adjust? Was it maybe like, I'm worried about what's going on stateside, or I'm worried about what's going on here? What kind of would you run into?
Yeah, so I would say their concerns were both. Again, you can prepare for it all you want, but until you're there, you don't actually know what you're going to be doing. So and that kind of cuts both ways, to Dennis's point. Like, once you're on ground, you see it, but then also once you're on ground, you're kind of like, okay. And so there's that steep learning curve. And so people are pretty fired up, but then after about probably 5 or 6 weeks, then they start to settle in. They're like, okay, this is, wow, I actually have a lot of downtime. so they would come to me and I would seek them out. But the big thing I wanted to make sure of is that people weren't isolating. And and it's hard to tell when it's 100 degrees outside. No one really wants to be, playing pickup basketball when it's 100 degrees out. And so just trying to keep an eye on people, making sure that people weren't isolated. And then also, I mean, the anxieties of things back home. I mean, we were perfectly safe, but as people, given our proximity to what was happening in Israel, people's families from home are like, they're calling like, I just read that, and we're like, no, it's fine. I mean, fine for us. I mean, we're not close to it, whatever. But yeah. And then what we saw is, as things are layered on, and this is true of the work I would do as a pastor in the civilian world as well, was that rarely would the thing that someone come to talk to me about really be the thing that they're concerned about. Rarely is the presenting issue the issue.
Yeah.
It's the feeler.
Yeah.
Getting the feels out.
Yeah. And
see how you respond.
See how I respond. And then, which kind of going back to God's timing, I think, I'm not saying I'm a great chaplain, but I am saying I'm such a better chaplain at 54 than I would have been at 24.
Right.
Because you have soldiers, on both ends of the spectrum and everything in between. You have some who just don't want anything to do with you because they see the cross. They know all the stereotypes of the candy chaplain who's going to make bad Jesus jokes and all of that. And so they don't want anything to do with you. And then you have people on the other end of that spectrum who, you're going to find out every possible personal detail of their life. And then everything in between. And so, so at age 24, had I stuck to my plan, I think I would have been shocked by, or feeling amazingly ill-equipped to provide any sort of support, comfort, much less assistance. At 54, I've been around.
Yeah, you get some life experiences. You get, maturity with your feelings and your understanding of traumas and adversities and
Exactly.
trials and tribulations, and your understanding of the word even probably
Yeah.
got better.
Yeah. So, so for some of it, it was soldiers trying to feel me out to see how well I was going to receive and withhold judgment. And then for others, I think it just, you got to kind of work through those issues yourself. I mean, they might come to talk to me because they're not getting along with somebody at work. But as you unpack that, the reason they're frustrated at work is because they have a family issue at home. And then,
Mhm.
and then as you unpack that, there's some, perhaps undiagnosed mental health issues that people are wrestling with, and so some of it kind of goes from both sides. Some of it is, how receptive is the chaplain going to be to hear about this? And then some of it is just their own processing. And again, needing to process it with somebody else, because as you said, Cameron, a lot of times we try to carry this stuff on our own. So if I carry this on my own, I think it's just a workplace issue, because
Mhm.
that's all that's in my head. I hate this guy that I work with. But it's not until I open up and process it with somebody else that then I begin to see, oh, the reason it really isn't this guy. It's,
Yeah.
it's this issue I'm carrying at home that is bleeding into my work here.
Well, I
Yeah. And
think
it's
Cameron said something about this in past episodes too. Like, you can have thoughts going on in your head, but until you actually voice them out to somebody else, that's when you like peeling the onion a little bit, peeling back the layers and going, okay, I already kind of answered my own question just by saying it and speaking it
yeah.
out. Like, I can already kind of start navigating the problem already just by talking.
Right. And that cuts both directions, right? Because in your head, you could also be telling yourself, oh my gosh, this is catastrophic.
Right.
And then when you actually say that word to somebody else, this is catastrophic, then you hear it out loud and you're like, actually, no, this isn't
Yeah.
really a catastrophe.
I got schooled on one of our last episodes. I said something like, I feel like, PTSD has made it super hard for me to get any better. I said something like that, and she just stopped me in my tracks and said, watch the words you say. Because you just said, PTSD makes me do this, and I'm defective. I said something like that, but
Yeah.
it was really off the cuff, like a spontaneous utterance. And
Yeah.
then, like, she grabbed it and was like, hey, just like my therapist would, my therapist would be like, hey, let's talk about self love here. Okay. If you can't love yourself, it's hard to love others. So let's talk about that first.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to, I mean, during a deployment, I've never been deployed. I haven't, but I can only imagine that it takes a heavy toll on your mental health. And as individuals, like kind of like me and like Dennis and like a lot of guys I know, we don't really like to talk about stuff, right? We'll come to you if we have an emergency. Like you said, we won't even talk about what it is. We're just trying to get to the back door of how do I fix this problem, right? But the first thing, you got to learn on an airplane, what you got to put on your mask first before you can help anybody else. It doesn't help if you foul and no one gets a mask on, right? So how do you make sure that you're attending to yourself and your mental health in order to be able to help others that you're serving?
Yeah. So for me, there are a number of things. I mean, kind of work from the inside out. I mean, number one, exercise is hugely important to me.
Got
And
it.
it is part of my mission statement for my life. And I have recognized over the years just the impact that it has on every other part of my life. I mean, I just feel so much more centered, so much better equipped to deal with the world and any of the challenges that are going on around me. So, so that's been a huge part for me. And, to the extent,
Same here. Same here. If I'm moving, you know what I mean? I can
yeah,
get out of my head for a bit. And then somehow the thing that I've been running over 100 times, like when I come out of it an hour later, I feel good. My hormones are better balanced and all this kind of stuff. I can think properly. And then it seems to be an easier process of whatever I was going through prior to it, That makes
yeah,
any sense.
absolutely. I mean, like I
Total
envision it
sense.
like I get up in the morning and I have all these thoughts in my head, and it's like when they're drawing the lottery and all those balls are flying around that, you know, they're
I
Yeah.
like it.
and they're all just whipping around, and then what happens, right? I mean, one drops and the next drops and the next drops and the next drops. And I feel like after a workout, then like things are just sorted. And so I'm still
Yeah.
carrying the same things. It's not that anything's quote unquote fixed, but there's just an order to it. And it's deeper than a to-do list for the day, but it's just like, instead of all of those things just swimming around, flying around, uncontrollable in my head, they've all just kind of settled and sorted. And so that's a huge piece for me. And then, I mean, prayer is just incredibly important. There's a practice and meditation that I do that I have on my phone, and I play it as soon as I'm done working out, and sometimes I'll just lie down right there, tap that thing on. My body's trashed, but my mind is incredibly alert. So there's no way I'm going to fall asleep or even get that distracted. And I just play that. It's about 15 minutes of music, scripture, some reflection questions and prayer. And again, it just helps kind of center me. And then for me, I mean, a big part is a therapist, man. I've been seeing a therapist for, a decade probably, and the way I phrase it for, especially for my military friends who love imagery, it's like, I don't see a therapist because I throat punched somebody, I see a therapist so I don't throat punch anybody. It's like, I mean, and so, one thing I've just become more and more convinced of over the years is how connected every part of our life is. And, and if you roll your ankle on a hike or a ruck or a run or whatever, I mean, you can kind of compartmentalize that pain to maybe get through that ruck, to get through that. But if you are suffering with chronic physical pain, at some point, it's going to impact you emotionally and spiritually. And likewise, if you're struggling emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, at some point, it's going to impact how you feel physically. You're either going to work out like a maniac or you're not going to work out at all. You're going to overeat. You're going to undereat. I mean, you're going to drink. You're going to do whatever to try to, it's going to impact your physical health. And so I've become a big fan over the years, and I try to talk about it in this way, that we ought to treat our mental health the same way we treat our physical health. And so we all know that you shouldn't wait until you're 300 pounds to get to the gym. But so many of us wait until we are emotionally, morbidly obese to go and get any kind of support for that. And so to me, if we're going to look at mental health the same way we look at physical health, then we need to take care of it daily and make it a part of our routine to be the best version of ourselves. And so, and then to understand sometimes there are mental health issues, but also there are like mental health injuries. I mean, both of my parents are dead, and I could tell you looking back that immediately after each of their deaths, and more so, my dad died in 2010, then my mother in 2015. And I don't think it was until 2015 when my mom died that I really grieved the death of my father. Because when my dad died in 2010, the question between me and my siblings was, who's got mom? Thanksgiving's coming up. Who's got mom? So we kind of turned our attention to taking care of her. And then when she died in 2015, that was when it was like, shit, like they are gone.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, if you would have given me any test or inventory or whatever after my mom died, absolutely, I would have tested out for depression. I have no doubt about it. But I also worked through it. And I also worked through it, not because I'm some sort of badass, but I worked through it because in the way I look at it, like that was not an illness, that was an injury. I lost both my parents. I'm grieving. That's an injury. And over time, that was able to heal.
Yeah.
But again, I look at my mental health the same way I look at my physical health, and the same way I look at my spiritual health. Like if I want to be healthy, I'm not going to wait until I'm morbidly obese, carrying around 500 pounds of emotional garbage to go and talk to somebody else about it. I'm just going to talk to somebody about it all the time so I can stay in shape.
Yeah. And
That's
I've been
about
guilty.
balance. You have to have
Yeah.
that balance, and then the self-awareness to understand when you're starting to get out of balance, one way or the other, eating too much, eating not enough, whatever it is, physical, but also spiritually and mentally. Like you're saying, to your point, an injury compared to an illness, like a sprained ankle, will heal over time. What you don't walk on it for a second. You don't cut your foot off because you have a sprained ankle.
Right. Yeah.
You're gonna do the things to heal it slowly.
Yeah.
And properly. So yeah, that's a great insight that you just how you put it there. It resonated with me. And I think I waited probably way too long. I waited about 14 years after I got back from Iraq before I started talking to anybody.
Okay.
And great improvements afterwards. Still not like out of the woods, I would say, but definitely long overdue and should have done a lot sooner. I think I was a little worried that I knew PTSD was going to be a nomenclature too on my medical record. I knew that was going to probably be a diagnosis. I just had the feeling for obvious reasons. And I was a police officer. And I was just worried about if I got into a shooting as a police officer and it came out in the media, even if I was correct in the shooting, 100%, somebody's going to roast me about having PTSD and being in law enforcement. So I think I put it off because of that. And it just snowballed and got worse and worse and worse, especially after Ferguson happened and what happened with Cameron.
Mm-hmm.
His injuries and his recovery, and then his re-injury and his re-recovery. And it also coincided with some other deaths from the military family during that same time. So I know I was really, really out of whack, and I waited way too long. So I probably was the morbidly obese, 400-pound mentally. When I called the VA and I finally said, you know what? One of the questions was, like, how much do you drink? I go, I only drink a little bit. And I go, no, I said I was going to do this. Let's do this. This is what I do. And that's when it changed. It changed because I was honest with myself.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was honest with my situation. I had the awareness that I was out of balance. It took me too long to get there, but I finally had that awareness that I was out of balance. And then I just did some work to try to get it repositioned in the right directions, in the right way. And I still got ways to go, but man, night and day difference.
That's awesome. No, that was amazing. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's super cool.
Well, and I think it's so important to share. I mean, like other people need to know. I mean, we talk a lot about normalizing this, but
Exactly.
again, I think like when I was deployed, I got a message that said, you have an appointment with a dentist at 1300 tomorrow. I mean, I was feeling fine. I didn't request an appointment with a dentist, but I got a message I was going to the dentist. Went in, got a checkup, got a cleaning, I was good to go. I think, man, wouldn't it be great if, while you're deployed, you get a message that says, hey, you have an appointment with behavioral health tomorrow at 1300. And same approach it the same way as the dentist. You may just need a cleaning and we'll see you in 6 months. Or, hey, we got a little more work to do. Come back and see me again.
Yeah.
But I just think, I would tell my leadership a lot as well, like share all the things that you're doing that work for you, because nobody just gets over it.
Yeah.
And so, but what are the things that you're doing? I mean, if don't just tell your guys like, hey, look at this largemouth I caught, just tell them, man, I love fishing. When I'm out on the water, I feel like I'm recentered. I feel like I'm closer to who I am. I just, it lowers my blood, like just even things like that. It's, you don't have to like rip apart the onion and show them the core right away, but just that, a little bit of vulnerability just to say, man, when I'm up in a deer stand, I am no more the person I could ever be because I'm out in nature. It does great. Just anything like that works for you, to just share that, because that will help other people see. Yeah. Oh, I see. Chaplain Day doesn't run just to run. He's not running just to shed a few pounds. He's running because it helps him stay centered.
Right. And I'm so guilty of the morbidly obese thing. I think that's where I was going a little bit earlier. And I think it's because like there's the embarrassment, I don't want to talk about what's bothering me because you might make fun of me or think I'm weak or something like that.
Right.
And it's also because until that last moment, I think that if I really try, I could turn it around. And then you basically hit rock bottom. You're like, I'm at a place where I've ignored it for so long that it's now I'm morbidly obese. I don't have to lose 10 pounds. I got to lose 80, or 100 or 200, whatever it is. And it almost seems like the mountain's too tall at that point. So you're just like, this is too overwhelming because I've put it off. Yes, I know that was wrong, but now I've got to deal with all this at the same time. So I think what you were saying is amazing. The idea of not letting it get there, because that happened to me. I had another trauma that was hidden inside of me. When this thing happened to me, it brought that other thing up. And
Yeah.
I really didn't want to deal with that other thing. But in order to heal from the shooting and the PTSD, I had to attend to that thing no matter how much I really didn't want to. And I really took it to the last stone to turn over. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted it to be any other way. But suddenly I talked about what had happened to me 30 years ago. I felt like a little kid when it happened, but then suddenly, like, I didn't die. A person automatically told me that I was innocent, which I needed to hear, as absurd as that sounds, as a 5-year-old being, we'll say, preyed on by an adult. And, it leaves scars in you, and they adjust how you see the world and all that kind of stuff. But especially when you're like injured at a young age, or even your whole life, I would say, like, understand that whatever age you're at, it's the maturity level at which you're going to be able to handle this situation. Somebody else, or a combination of people, are going to take years of their experience and put it together and be able to offer you more than what you're kind of cranking through, picking up the bits and pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I had to find the bits and pieces and be like, okay, it's my decision. I'll do therapy. You know what I mean? Instead of being told. And then I ended up doing it. And I'm a huge advocate for it, because as soon as you say some of the things you're thinking out loud, not only do they sound like a little crazy, a little over the top, they can actually be funny how ridiculous they are. Like, there's no way I really think that. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it just gets kind of crazy. So that is such a good point, not to hold on to that stuff, because it doesn't just go away. As much of a bummer as that is, you got to work on it. And on a daily basis, I'm learning is the best way to do it. Because if I were to do therapy, let's say every 6 months, that wouldn't work as well.
Right.
I had to figure out that I need to go more often. So it went from, like, initially, when I first got hurt, it was actually pretty intense. It was twice a week for a while. But then I was able to get to once a week. And then I was able to get to twice a week. And then now I'm at, like, once every 2 or 3 weeks. Now, I'm not going to push past that, because I know that if I go past that, there's too much to talk about. There's too many things to do, and I go to a therapist specifically for my PTSD. And we do specific treatments like EMDR, where you follow either a sound or a dot from side to side, which activates your left and right brain. So you basically put yourself back in the situation, but it teaches your brain you survived, right? So I need to, like, be able to walk in and be like, okay, so we're going to do that therapy today. And the only way I know I can do that is because the last time I talked to you about all the other stuff on the back burner, like all the things I've been inflating, all the rabbit holes I've been going down. So now I'm getting centered. I'm ready to process. Let's get into this. Let's work. You know what I mean? So it's like this whole ramp up to getting there. There's other things they're doing for PTSD now too. Some therapies I'm hearing about, ketamine. I'm not going to do that. Given my experience with alcohol, I don't want to get into anything that would potentially be whatever. And then there's mushrooms and stuff and all that kind of, or what do you call it? Psychedelics, which that they're starting to use for PTSD.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of this.
You didn't? Yeah, we need to talk about it then on another episode. They're using psychedelics, like, in small micro doses, which are supposed to help that part of the brain which feels a fight, flight, or freeze. There's another thing that they're doing, which I was offered, but I don't want to, there needs to be more research on it for me. It's actually a shot they put at the base of your brain, which deactivates that fight, flight, or freeze part of your brain. So I'll get more information about everything I just talked about, and we'll discuss it on another episode.
My luck, I'd witness a bank robbery just right after I got that shot, and I wouldn't be able to do anything to help.
Just be blank.
Oh, cool. There goes.
Yeah. Ta-da. What is that movie? Wonderstone, when Jim Carrey drills a hole in his head. He's like, ta-da. It's awful.
Well, I got another question for Patrick, real quick. I just out of curiosity, for my own understanding of where you're at. I know you weren't in a really hot spot or whatever, more peacekeeping, and you said you guys are really, really safe. But there were elements out there that knew you were there. that probably didn't like you there. Did they do anything? Rocket attacks, secret attacks, do anything, or was it pretty well?
No, I mean, given our
For what
proximity
you
to
can't talk about, of course.
Yeah, no, I mean, just given our proximity to Gaza, I mean, we could hear what was going on over there, but again, nothing was ever coming our way.
Nothing set your way.
No.
All right.
No.
I didn't know that there's some little secret story in there that you're kind of just glossing over with. Oh no, we were safe.
No.
I said the same thing, even though we were getting rocketed about 3 or 4 times a week. Well, we're relatively safe.
Yeah, you define it as safe for yourself. Well, they're getting 10 rockets a day. We're getting 4, so we're safe.
Yeah, right. I don't know. There might have been something there.
Yeah.
Well, good for you.
Now, I was curious about this, but, for a while I couldn't find God. And I think I was the main issue. I was ashamed and, I didn't think he'd want me back and all that kind of stuff. I didn't believe he was in me. I didn't believe he was in my house. I didn't believe he was in my community. I didn't believe he was in my state. I didn't believe he was in my country. I didn't believe he was in the world for a period. Now I can see God everywhere. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I know that God assigned the bullet to hit me in the cheek to send me on the trajectory that it sent me to turn me into the person I am now. I can say that with full confidence, and that's crazy to me. So I can see God in moments like when someone doesn't get a job. It may not even be about the job. It may be actually like I didn't get a job last year around February. But then my dad passed in March, and I was able to spend all my time in St. Louis for about a month with my mother while we were going through that process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm eternally grateful for that. And it's amazing kind of when you can start seeing that things in a way are happening for you and not to you. Like Chris Ashley, one of our previous guests, spoke about, like things are actually, it seems strange, but it's almost like when you get in the water and you're like, the water's fine. Everyone get in, don't worry about the water. And it's just been such a crazy thing. So I was curious, when you're overseas, when you're kind of like in a war zone, where do you still see God? Like, how do you keep him right there and kind of the center while there's chaos potentially going on around you? How do you keep that focus? And in turn, how do you keep other people focused?
Yeah.
So personally, I would say it was not all that difficult. My mentor, pastor in the PCUSA, her name is Christine Chicoyan, and she's amazing. She paid me a really, really high compliment decades ago. I've known her for 30 years. And she told me that I have a gift for seeing the holy in the mundane. So for me to keep God close was really not that difficult. I mean, also, the scenery kind of set it up. I mean, we were in the part, I counted 12 trips across the area that we were living in from the beginning of Genesis into Exodus.
Oh.
One of the duty tours that I got to take was to climb Mount Sinai.
There you go.
Wow.
Somebody asked me if do you think it's the real Mount Sinai? I was like, I don't care. I'm like, it's a huge frickin' mountain here in the desert. And so whether it was this one or that one, it doesn't.
Does it bring you closer to the moment of Jesus stalking on the mountain Sinai?
So
did it make you think of that positive stuff, then it's the right mountain.
Well, exactly. And here's the thing, though, that was interesting. Like that day, I was going to have a spiritual experience. I was going to meet God at the top of that mountain. And it's not an easy hike. And I got to the top of the mountain ready to meet God. And I'm like, all right, like experience could start anytime now, Lord, And on the one hand, it was cool. A couple of the guys that were hiking with me, we gathered together, we read the 10 Commandments together, and that was pretty powerful. But what I found really interesting was then we hiked back down, and just as we get to the bottom, we see the sun start to drop over the west side. And as I'm looking up at the mountain, it occurred to me, if I were one of the Israelites and that huge mountain was covered with clouds and I was hearing thunder and seeing lightning in the clouds, I imagine I'd look up there and go, Moses isn't coming back. We might want to gather up the gold and maybe, I don't know, make a calf out of it, start worshiping that, because he is not coming down from that mountain. And I left there actually having a lot more grace for that part of the story in Exodus, where he goes up to the mountain, he's talking to God, and he's not just gone for a few minutes. I mean, he's gone for days. And I could see how they would be at the bottom of the mountain and think he's not coming back.
Right.
And I left with a lot more grace for the people in that story, because it's easy to sit back and go, oh my gosh, how faithless. The Lord has already protected you from so much. He'll protect you from this.
Right.
And I found it really interesting that I had decided I would have a spiritual experience at the top of the mountain, and the Lord decided that I would meet God at the bottom of the mountain. And
that's great.
And so, for me, then, again, in talking with soldiers, I really let them guide the conversation. I mean, this is probably lamentable among the chaplain corps, but I talked like two people out of getting baptized while we were over there.
Yeah.
And how cool would it be to baptize someone in the Red Sea as a pastor, to be able to baptize someone in the Red Sea? Oh my gosh, that would be so cool. But two different soldiers, as we talked more about their desire to get baptized, they decided that they really wanted their family to be there and be a part of the baptism. And so they were going to wait until they got home to get baptized. And I feel like, awesome. I mean, because it'd be cool for me to baptize someone in the Red Sea, but guess what? That baptism isn't about me.
There you go.
It's about them. And so if they want to enter into that sacrament, that transformational moment in their life, surrounded by family, God bless them. I'm not going to get in the way of that. So yeah, when it comes to bringing God to soldiers, man, I don't know what they're ready to receive.
Mm-hmm.
You think about the best meal you've ever had as an adult, but that's not the meal that you would feed to a newborn.
Yeah.
Right.
A newborn needs milk. And so when I work with soldiers, when it comes to just, specific religious stuff or even evangelism, if you will, I'm really, really just let them take the lead, because I don't know what they're ready to receive. And I don't want to try to start shoving a steak dinner down their throat if they still just need milk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
you almost create like a situation of attraction to Christianity or religion or God instead of promotion. You know what I mean? It's like people are attracted to the way you're living, so they're like, I want to figure out what's going on with this guy.
Yeah, I just try to be hospitable and invitational.
Yeah.
There's a worship song. It's probably considered way, cheesy old school worship song now, but it's come now is the time to worship. And in that, there is a line kind of paraphrasing Philippians 2, where it says, one day every tongue will confess, one day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. And here's what I think. Some people may think that that's it. And I don't know what the author thinks, so I may be totally contradicting whoever wrote that song. But the way I interpret those words, to me, it's not about heaven. It's about the difference that having Christ in my life has made for me here and now. I'm not saying that heaven's not a part of that, but it's not like we have this life and then we have eternal life. Like, this is part of our eternal life.
It's preparing you for it.
Yeah, so I think about the difference that Christ has made in my life on this planet. And that has been an incredible reward for me. It's taken me to some very, very hard places. I don't know about you. I'm running out of time here in the next several minutes, but
yeah,
but like, in my civilian job, when I was living in Chicago, one of my jobs at a church was to organize a search party for people that were lost on Lake Michigan. That's not fun. There's nothing fun about that. There's nothing enjoyable about that. And the end result of that was incredibly painful. But man, what a privilege it is to be in that space with other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fun. In that moment, I don't even know that I would call it rewarding, because that sounds cheesy and transactional, but it's quite an honor.
But it's still a level of spiritual intimacy that is hard to explain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when I work with soldiers, and really with anybody, I mean, it's not just soldiers, it's anybody. I mean, it's more just being invitational and seeing and offering them then whatever it is that they're ready to receive. And just going back to the illustration you used at the top of our conversation, I mean, if the extent of my relationship with somebody is that they came into the free exchange on deployment and, grabbed some deodorant and a couple sticks of beef jerky, and we had a pleasant conversation, at least they know that, hey, that they're welcome there.
Yeah.
They're always welcome there. And so, that's my big thing, is just, you're always welcome.
I like that. I like the way you're putting it too. It's like, I've always thought of it that way myself. Like I said, I was pretty religious when I was younger. And it was about the time that they got really big into pushing the idea of going door to door and giving out your testimony and trying to actively recruit people to the church that I just felt uncomfortable with. I felt more like I should just live my example. And if people ask me about it, that's my chance to share a little bit about it. Like you said, to feed them what they need to hear a little bit at a time. You're not going to give them the steak dinner if they're just ready for, the milk of a newborn. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I appreciate that you do that, because I feel like it's more receptive for people, for those that are just kind of testing the waters a little bit. It's going to be more receptive to them if you're just kind of giving them the little bits here and there, and you're not trying to say, no, let's do this. Let's get you baptized right now. Let's go here. Here's your Bible. Let's go confirmation.
Yeah, well, and that's it. And I will tell you, both in the military and in the civilian world, most people I meet that tell me that they have a problem with God, there are some who really have a problem with God. They've had some type of experience, or they just can't reconcile that the Almighty would allow this or that to happen.
Which is understandable. I've been in that boat too, for different things.
Yeah, absolutely. But most people I meet that say they have a problem with God, and again, I'm not accusing them of lying. I think it's just how they're processing it. Who they really have a problem with is the church.
Yes.
They have a problem with God's representation on this planet that is run by fallible, sinful human beings.
Yeah.
And so if, I don't certainly in no way to claim to be God. I think even asking what would Jesus do is sometimes a pretty aggressive question, because I don't know that I can live up to that on my best day.
Right.
But
we're not supposed to be able to, even on our best day.
But I just, I just try to remember that, really most people I meet, it's not a problem with Jesus. It's a problem with his followers.
Yeah.
And so if I can just try in some way to have an encounter with them that then shifts their perspective even a tiny bit of
I like it.
Like to be a follower of Jesus, then to me that's evangelism.
We've been working on an idea of how to explain different perspectives, like a circle, a 365 degree circle, a 360 degree circle. Then you're sitting at the 15 degree, I'm sitting at the 95 degrees. We're on opposite sides of it. Your view is completely different than mine. So what you got to do is shift even in a degree further each side, so you can start seeing the other perspective a little bit better.
Exactly.
And then to turn that globally into like a 3D sphere of perceptions or variables into any problem that you want to address and talk about. I'm still working on a lot of fine tuning of this to explain or how to do it all, but I love it because so many guests, almost every single guest has said something like, you got to look at it from a little bit different perspective. You just got to shift it 1 degree. And it's just like just feeding right into this whole idea of something that I want to get into one day. Anyway, Cam, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, you didn't at all. No, I get it. And I'm still working with that, like what you're saying, because now I'm seeing that There's actually something in the middle, and it might be the truth. And we're all looking at it from different spots. You know what I mean? So I'm looking at this side, you're looking at this side, and we both see the truth, but only through our own eyes. So, I mean, there's so many layers to that onion and all that kind of stuff. But I will have to say, Patrick, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so
Agreed.
much. And you shared so much good stuff. I know it's going to help people who are out there. If I may ask one last question, what would you say to the person who is suffering today and they're deciding whether they're going to take the chance to even try faith? They've never been in a religious person. Their life doesn't feel like, I would say
So
in my situation, was worth living. Why, before I make that decision, should I explore faith?
Wow.
you save the
Yeah.
easy one for last.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
one tiny little question to wrap things up. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I would echo what I said before in that song lyric is, see what it might offer you. And, and I guess I would start with, sort of the negative first. I mean, so if you're at this spot, then nothing else you have tried has worked.
There you go.
So really, man, what do you have to lose? Take a shot. And specifically, I would say to read Psalm 139 and to read Matthew. Because I do know some people will say, you know what, I just tell people just open up the Bible and start reading. And I say that's the last thing I tell people, because depending on what page you open it up to, I mean, seriously, I mean, there's some really terrible stuff in there. And so it could just immediately drive you away. But I would tell them, you know what, man, read Psalm 139 about how close God is to you, how you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And then I would tell them to read Matthew, because, man, when you get into what Jesus is doing in the Beatitudes and the double love commandment, and the way we're called to care for one another, I mean, to me, it'll just light your world on fire. And I think it'll change your life again, and not just about what we look forward to when we are ashes to ashes and dust to dust, but how we can experience this life right here and now. Because, Cameron, I mean, I'll say this, as we were talking about me coming on, and you said, one of the things we have people do is talk about your own story, where you've been up shit creek and how you've made your way through it. And as I've reflected on that, I got to tell you, man, I've never been up shit creek. Not, certainly not in the way you have, Dennis, not in the way you have, but, really it's my faith that has compelled me to just camp out on the side of shit creek for my entire life.
When you're looking for those bodies in the lake, that's a shit creek too. That can do things in your mind that could be just like a shit creek. So don't sell yourself short. You've had some shit creek moments.
No, and
what are you saying? You're sitting on the bank.
Yeah, I like it too.
I'm not, but that's the thing. There's something about the presence of Christ in my life that has just compelled me to camp out on the side of shit creek and just hand people a paddle, throw them a rope, do whatever I can, because that to me that's where life is.
Yeah. Well, also Jesus says to be a fisher of men. You're on the bank fishing in shit creek, trying to help save some people come out. Yeah, I like it.
Absolutely. I mean, so going back to your question, Cameron, I mean, I would just say, look, if nothing else that you have tried has worked, then what do you have to lose?
I love it.
And take a stab.
I love it.
And read Psalm 139 and read the Gospel of Matthew, and then let's have a conversation and tell me what you think.
I love it. That's such a great answer. I know that was a tricky last question, but thank you again. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. You're amazing. And let's catch up. I need to buy you some lunch, and anything I can do for you in any capacity, I'm here for you. I'm sure Dennis is too.
Yeah. Anytime you're in St. Louis, let me know. I got a room you can stay at, or we can go get lunch too.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Have a great day, and see you next time.
Thank you,
Cameron. Have a good day. Patrick, pleasure to meet you.
Thanks, Dennis. You too, man.
Good day, sir.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you, Patrick, again for being such a great guest. Wherever you are, please like, subscribe, and share. That way it gets to more people and we can start reaching everyone who needs to hear this stuff. So have a great week and we'll see you next time.